So, a friend of mine asked me what type of mouse do I use, and I said, "Well, I like the SteelSeries Rival. It's a good series of mouse. It's a good solid mouse. It's simplistic, but yet it comes with a lot of extra features. I like a mouse that only has like two side buttons and a nice textured scroll wheel." And he said, "Oh, okay, well, what kind of features does it come with?" I said, "Well, you can adjust the pulling rate, the angle snapping." And he's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what exactly is pulling rate?" And I said, "Well, pulling rate is how often your mouse sends information to your computer, and it's measured in hertz. So I can set it between 125, 250, 500, and 1,000 hertz." And he says, "Well, what does that mean? What does that do for you?" I said, "Well, basically, if I have it set at 125 hertz, that means it takes about 8 milliseconds from the time I actually move the mouse until the mouse actually moves on the screen. It's not exactly 1-to-1. But if I set it to 1,000 hertz, it changes it down to about 1 millisecond, which means that if I move the mouse with my hand, then it takes about 1 millisecond for the movement to actually occur on the screen." And he says, "Well, what does that matter?" I said, "Well, I like to play games like CSGO and other first-person shooters. I'm not competitive, but I do like to have an advantage when I can. And the advantage is, say I'm playing at 1,000 hertz, which means that it takes 1 millisecond from the time I actually move my hand on the table for the mouse to actually move on the screen, versus, say, someone who's playing at 250 hertz with their mouse's physical limitations. That means it takes them 4 milliseconds. It means that I can react exactly 3 milliseconds faster than that person. And to be quite honest, as a casual player, it's not that big of a deal. But it is nice to know that when I move my hand and rotate my player around, I'm doing it faster than the guy who isn't using it at 1,000 hertz or 1 millisecond. And it's really just a personal preference thing. I like having that capability. So he asked me, why doesn't everybody just set it at 1,000 hertz? And I said, well, because it can have an impact on your CPU. So with that said, I'm going to demonstrate what increasing the polling rate, if any, has an effect on a CPU, if it has any effect whatsoever on a CPU. So right now I'm going to head and I'm monitoring Open Hardware Monitor, and I'm looking at the CPU total, which is right here. And I'm also looking at Windows Task Manager, which has my CPU right there. So I'm going to reset the maxes and mins on Open Hardware Monitor, and I'm going to leave my polling rate at 125 hertz, which comes back to about 8 milliseconds from the time I move the mouse physically until it actually moves on the screen. Now, keep in mind I have a program called Xsplit running, which does utilize some CPU more than if the computer was just idling with these programs open. So right now with the mouse not moving, I'm looking at about 6.3% CPU total. This is an average of all 8 cores of my AMD FX 8320 8-core processor. It's about 6.6. It kind of fluctuates as things kind of happen in the background. Now I'm going to start moving the mouse in circles over Open Hardware Monitor. I'm just going to move it vertically, horizontally, and just keep doing that and see what my peak average is. It doesn't look like it really has a major effect right now. See, it jumped up to about 9.6, but I can't really say that was the mouse because the mouse has been moving and it didn't go up. So I'm going to reset my maxes and mins. There's my baseline, and I'm going to spin the mouse. Up and down, left and right, just keep moving the mouse. And it doesn't really look like it has too big of an impact. I'm only getting up to about, let's say, 7%. All right. So now I'm going to increase the polling rate up to 1,000 hertz. I'm going to save it and reset my mins and maxes and let it sit idle again without the mouse moving. And it looks like I'm getting up to about 6%. You look at Windows Task Manager and it says about 8%. So now I'm going to start spinning the mouse in circles. Up and down, left and right, 14.3%. That jumped up there quite a bit from about 7%, almost double. So it is utilizing more of the CPU to send that information more frequently to the CPU from my mouse. The downside is if you have a limited amount of CPU power, let's say you're not using an 8-core FX series processor, let's say you're using a FX 4000 series quad-core processor or something even worse like a dual-core or something that isn't sufficient or as sufficient rather than this 8-core processor, it may cause your gaming experience to suffer as a result of the higher polling rate. So having the ability to customize it still allows you to use the quality mouse, but if you determine that the rest of your computer hardware isn't up to par, you may be able to decrease the polling rate in order to save some of that CPU time for the game itself. So right now we're at about 6.8% is where it peaked up at. Again, mouse isn't moving. We're at 1,000 hertz, and now I'm going to spin the mouse again. Moving the mouse there causes the CPU usage utilization percentage to increase. Got up to about 11.5% this time. Yeah, so call it 12%, 11%. Again, reset the mins and maxes. Decrease the polling rate down to 125 hertz, and again, we got up, let's say, 12% last time. Mouse not moving gets up to about 6%. Yeah, see, mouse moving, it only gets up to about 6%. Now if I increase the polling rate up to 1,000, reset mins and maxes. So say it got up to about 7% on average. See, I'm going to go ahead and reset the mins and maxes again, let it sit there, get a baseline reading, and start moving the mouse. Yeah, see, it jumps up quite a bit. Versus the 125 hertz. So I would say in conclusion that higher polling rate does increase utilization of the CPU in total versus a lower polling rate. What does this mean for you as a gamer? Does this mean that you should have a lower polling rate or a higher polling rate? I would say your mileage will vary. It depends on what kind of CPU you have. It depends on what game you're running. CSGO is not a very high CPU demanding game in my situation. I can have that game maxed out, every setting cranked up all the way, and it doesn't even make my computer sweat. It's not because my computer is so awesome. It's because I'm running a 980 with an 8320 8-core processor. It's just that game is just its source engine. It's not really that demanding on my system. So if I have a higher polling rate with it, it doesn't really make a difference. Now, like say Grand Theft Auto 5, that does make my computer sweat a little bit. If I were to use mouse and keyboard, I may want to consider tuning down the polling rate to maybe 500 hertz, which would equate to 2 milliseconds. So we're losing 1 millisecond from the time I move the mouse till the time the actual movement occurs on the screen, which isn't that big of a deal in my opinion. So if it means that the game will run faster or cleaner or better, I may consider changing the polling rate for that game alone. But if it doesn't have an impact that you can notice, then I would say, yeah, go as high as you can with before it actually has an impact on your system. But again, some users out there have bought the SteelSeries mouse, and they bought it for the specific purpose of all the other functions as well as customizable polling rate. Well, you can still run that on even a system that is less, say, powerful than this system is, and be able to customize your polling rate depending on the circumstance of which game you're running and what you're doing with it. So as you can see here, I'm at 500 milliseconds. I got up to about 8.8%. Reset the mins and maxes. Let it sit there again. Redo that again, because again, I know when there's background things hitting the CPU, because there's just these giant spikes every once in a while. And a lot of that could just be Xsplit recording this video, as well as just other things that I have running in the background. So now I'm going to go ahead and spin the mouse again, vertically, horizontally, and it gets up to about 9.2. Okay, that's at 500 milliseconds. Let's go back down to 125 hertz, or 500 hertz. Let's go back down to 125 hertz, reset the mins and maxes, and spin the mouse. 7%. Yeah, it gets up to about 7%. It really doesn't go up any higher than that at 125 hertz. Let's go up to 1,000 again, reset my mins and maxes, and spin the mouse. Yep, 12%. It seems like it's the difference of about maybe 4 to 7%, just depending on what's going on at that specific time that I start moving the mouse. See, 17%, I don't blame the mouse. I believe that's background processes. It definitely is higher with 1,000 hertz. So take that into consideration when setting your polling rate. Thank you for watching.